Мы его попросили прочитать лекцию о внешней политике Великобритании. Это, на мой взгляд, очень интересный такой случай, потому что Британия — страна, которая, на мой взгляд, находится в поисках своей идентичности, в поисках себя. Вы знаете, что долгое время Британия была мировой сверхдержавой, обладала огромной колониальной империей, и довольно быстро она все потеряла. Да? Еще после Второй мировой войны Британия превратилась в обычную, скажем так, хоть и влиятельную, но европейскую страну, а уже не мировую державу. И вот интересно, да, как она с этой ситуацией справляется, что она намерена делать дальше, как она ведет себя сейчас, и как не Полу, да, Ричардсону нам об этом сейчас сказать. Итак, он будет читать лекцию на английском языке, на чистом английском языке, на клавише, да, так что это для вас хорошая возможность попрактиковать свой язык. Я бы хотел, и Пол, надеюсь, тоже, чтобы мероприятие у нас в таком интерактивном режиме проходило, вот, чтобы не только он вел свой монолог, да, но чтобы вы тоже, когда задавали вопросы, комментировали, это очень даже приветствуется. Пожалуйста, любые вопросы будут только поощряться. Все, спасибо большое. Я заканчиваю свое выступление. Пожалуйста, Пол.
Thank you, Artyom, and good morning, everybody. Good morning. Thank you for coming to my lecture today. It's very nice to see so many people. Artyom Professor Lukin already gave a kind of summary of what I'll talk about. It'll be a kind of broad perspective, some history, some geography, some culture, some politics, and a few words about the future of Britain. Britain's a long way from Vladivostok. 11 hours time difference separates us. So it separates me from my family, 11 hours. We always have to juggle the time. It's the other side of the world in terms of time. So I'd like also to kind of also have some exchange with you. I'll ask maybe some questions, and what do you know about this distant country from Vladivostok? But as Artyom Lukin said, Great Britain also had at different times quite a big influence on the world. He's right, today this influence is not as great as it was, but at different times it has had quite an influence on world politics, which as students of international relations I think is quite interesting for you. So let me begin by maybe asking you, what is the United Kingdom? Which countries form the United Kingdom, or what are its parts? England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, exactly. So it's four states. I'll try and we have no multimedia here, no PowerPoint, kind of traditional blackboard. So I'll try to draw the picture of Great Britain. Scotland's up here. Not so good. Some Chinese in the background.
Oh, really?
So this is not perfect, but roughly the map. Maybe at the back it's difficult to see. But here we have, of course, Wales. Here is Northern Ireland, and around here is Scotland. I unfortunately missed Scotland. But as I will talk later, maybe Scotland will leave the United Kingdom in the future. This is a kind of an issue at the moment in British politics. So here we have roughly the United Kingdom. I think I cut too much there.
Looks better.
Thank you.
Bigger.
So actually it's a very small country. If you look at it, it's a small island country. Japan is a bigger country, for example. If you take England itself, it's really not a particularly big country. But at times the British Empire had a big influence. But first, what do we know? Of course, here is the capital of London, of England. I won't ask you what that is. That's London. What is the capital of Wales? Cardiff, yes, exactly. It is here, Cardiff. Edinburgh is the capital of Scotland. Here. Here. And here is, which city is here? Belfast. Exactly.
Because of the song, yeah, Belfast.
And where the Titanic was built,
Yeah.
Belfast, also famous. Any other cities? What other cities do we know in the United Kingdom? Think of it, maybe football clubs, if you like football. Manchester is very popular. Manchester is around here. And Manchester is quite interesting for me because this is my next job, will be at the University of Manchester. So I'm moving there and hope you will visit one day. Famous, maybe most famous for its football club. What other cities are important? Wales?
Bath.
Oh, Bath, of course. Bath is kind of around, somewhere around here. Very famous city, very beautiful city, historic city from Roman times. They still have a kind of almost 2,000-year-old Bath. The water is not so clean these days, but it's really a really beautiful place. Any other cities?
Liverpool.
Liverpool, of course, is around here. Liverpool. What's Liverpool famous for? Beatles, exactly, yeah. That's a big export from Liverpool, and of course its football team. Any others? What is the second biggest city in the United Kingdom?
Birmingham.
Yes, it is. Very good, Birmingham. Birmingham and Manchester are almost the same size, but there's kind of a rivalry over this. Birmingham. Let's have one more city to complete the map. Any others?
Aberdeen.
Aberdeen is kind of off the map. It's up at the top there. But Aberdeen's an important city for oil industry. And other important cities would be, for example, Leeds. Leeds is here in Yorkshire, where I'm from. I was born on the coast here, small town by the coast, a small port, smaller than Vladivostok, even smaller than Nakhodka, very small place.
But in general, you have to write, you know, it's just to remember that it was Paul Rичardson from Scotland.
Home place. I'll kind of put my home. I'll put my place of birth around here, called Scarborough. So I'm not kind of from the the capital, not the big place, not from Oxford or Cambridge, but from a very nice place called Scarborough, which is famous for Vikings. The Vikings came in 1,500 years ago, invaded from Scandinavia, and they had a big influence on this northern part of the United Kingdom. And these other towns are very industrial. These are very new towns. Manchester, Liverpool, Leeds, Birmingham. These are they used to be villages. 200 years ago, these were very small. And then in the Industrial Revolution, in the Age of Empire, these became huge industrial cities. Marx and Engels visited Manchester. They saw the condition of the working classes there, which were terrible. Charles Dickens wrote about these conditions in these cities. Birmingham was a centre of the car industry and a centre of the weapons manufacturing, guns and artillery. Birmingham has, all these cities have a lot of canals, which was the beginning of the transport network. Before railways, before roads, canals were how people moved around the United Kingdom. All of these, Leeds, Manchester, Liverpool, Birmingham, London, were all connected by canals, by water. I think, yeah. So this is kind of the overview of the geography of the United Kingdom. So what about the people? Who is famous? Who is famous from the United Kingdom? Who do we know? Shakespeare, very good, yes. David Beckham, of course. He's more international now, going to Los Angeles and Paris at the moment. Rooney, God. So any non-footballers? Churchill?
Arthur Conan Doyle.
Arthur Conan Doyle, of course, the detective, Sherlock Holmes, of course, Baker Street in London, you can visit. James Bond is a fictional character, he doesn't really exist. Anyone else? I think people who had big influences would, of course, be Charles Darwin, of course, he had a very big influence on science and the world. Other famous Britons would be probably, for example, Queen Victoria. She had almost a whole era aimed after her. Victorian age, the age of empire, was very famous. And as you said, today our exports are more maybe soft power, kind of football, music, of course, the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, David Bowie, it's kind of the golden age, Coldplay, Muse. There's kind of this more soft power coming from the UK these days. Who is the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom today?
David Cameron.
David Cameron, yes. Not a particularly famous figure on the world stage. He's been elected for 4 years now. He is the current Prime Minister of the Conservative Party. I think we'll talk about these parties if we have a little time later. So anyone know the population of the United Kingdom? How many people live there? 55? That's close, quite close. It's around 63 million people, which makes it the 22nd, by population, the 22nd in the world. At one time, London was the biggest city in the world. In the 19th century, London was the biggest city in the world, but of course, you know, American cities today, New York, Tokyo, I think probably even Seoul, these are, you know, bigger cities today than London. Its economy is the 6th largest in the world, so still has a very big economy. But each year it's kind of slipping down a little bit. The BRICS are rising. China has overtaken it. Probably India next, Brazil, and probably Russia eventually as well. In terms of military spending, what position do we think the United Kingdom is for military spending? Of course, we have exactly, absolutely fourth. We have China. The first place is of course United States, China, Russia, and then the United Kingdom is still fourth. So still a big military power. And what about from international relations perspective? What organizations, international organizations, is United Kingdom part of? European Union is a very big part, a very big, important organizations. However, some people in the United Kingdom want to leave the European Union, and we'll talk more about that later. Any other organizations? NATO, of course, a very important security organization. Any more?
WTO.
Which one?
WTO.
WTO, of course, very important. With Russia, of course, in the G8, the G20. The Commonwealth is a very loose organization of kind of ex-imperial states, ex-colonial states that have joined together. Very loose Commonwealth. Doesn't work so well. And as Artyom Lukin raised an interesting point, is today Britain a great power? That's a very interesting question. In some respects you might say yes, in others you might say no. It's certainly in terms of military, it still spends a lot. It has nuclear weapons, one of the few states that still has nuclear weapons. However, it's certainly not a rising power. It's certainly a power that's relatively declining. Okay. So let me just talk a little bit in general, a little bit about the historical context of Britain, very briefly. A few words on this. Britain was first settled by the first kind of humans to come to the United Kingdom were called Celts. There's a famous football team in Glasgow called Celtic. We would say for the people Celtic, but for the football team Celtic. So be careful with this when you're meeting British or Scottish friends. So the Celtic people, Celtic was kind of, this was the origins of the United Kingdom. Stonehenge, of course, is one of their most famous constructions, a world famous site, a very beautiful site, a very old site, thousands and thousands of years old. And over time, however, there was migration to England, migration from different places. The Romans came about 2,000 years ago. The Romans came to London, a very important town, and where my parents live at the moment is York. York is here. This was also a very important Roman city, as was Bath. They all had names. Londinium was the name for London, York was Iberasum, Chester, not Manchester, but Chester, a smaller city, was a Roman centre. And when the Romans came, they pushed the Celtics out. They pushed the Celtic people towards here, towards Ireland, to the fringe of Wales, and to the north of Scotland. So there was kind of they were pushed out in kind of competition, you know, with Romans and with migration from continental Europe. There was even built almost 2,000 years ago in AD 122. The Romans built almost a great wall of Britain in the north to keep, very much like China, to keep the barbarians out in the north. And this was around here, not quite the Scottish border, but around here. Does anyone know what this wall is called?
Hadrian's Wall.
Hadrian's Wall, exactly. It's with an H. After the, of course, the Emperor Hadrian. Still, you can see this. Still, it's not as impressive as the Chinese Great Wall. So don't be too excited. It's really just kind of a small wall. But still, it's all very interesting from it. So this is a kind of feature, one of the historic feature. Stonehenge is around here. And then over time, there was kind of first the Romans, and then the Anglo-Saxons came. The Anglo-Saxons are kind of Germanic people from Germany who migrated westwards across Europe towards the United Kingdom. Around 1,000 years ago, 1,200 years ago, around 1900, England became more united. You know, the tribes came together. There was more, some form of beginnings of a state began to form. Became united. But the big event occurred. Perhaps in a very famous date in England. This is one of our key national moments. I mean, in Russia you have your own. You have Kulikova is a big moment. Borodino, Stalingrad. These big moments of kind of national identity and history. 1066 was a big moment for the United Kingdom, or England at the time. We didn't have a United Kingdom at this time. It was England. In 1066, what happened? England was invaded. From Normandy, from northern France. It was invaded by someone called William the Conqueror, because he conquered he conquered England. There was a big battle called the Battle of Hastings, and there's a very famous tapestry, a very famous picture of this battle in 1066. And he took over, the elite took over the whole of England, and French culture, French language, became very important. French influence became very important on this. They also conquered they began to conquer this Celtic fringe as well. The Celtic peoples were pushed further and further. Ireland became influenced by the Normans, we call them. People were pushed further and further to the fringe, the Celtic people. Eventually, Wales was defeated. Eventually, Wales became was the first of these states to become part of what would become the United Kingdom. Wales was the first. But the characteristics of almost hundreds of years of British history after the Norman conquest was a rivalry with Scotland. Another key event, it was in the 17th century, was the Reformation, when Britain went from being a Catholic country, which is kind of from the Roman legacy, to becoming a Protestant country. A very famous king, a very fat king called Henry VIII. In the Catholic religion, he was not allowed to have more wives, but he wanted to have many wives, and he succeeded in this. But to do this, he had to basically disconnect with the Catholic Church. And after this, England became a Protestant country. Up until today, still the Church of England is a Protestant country. And also, interestingly, this had some big factors. Around this time, there were some migrations. Ireland retained its Catholicism. Ireland kept being a Catholic country. However, there was migration to the north, Protestant migration to the north of Ireland. A great number of people settled here as farmers, took the land from the Catholic local population. And even today, as I'm sure many of you know, these religious conflicts are still a feature of Northern Ireland politics. I won't talk too much more about the history. This is international relations is more contemporary. But another couple of key events were the English Civil War. This was a civil war between the monarchy and between the rising business classes, the rising merchant class, who wanted a republic. There was the king was actually deposed. It was not quite like not as violent as later in France. I think he kept his head. But for a short while there was a republic. In the 17th century, there was a republic, no monarchy, which was a real revolution in European politics. And in European politics at the time, the kings and queens were descended from God. They were directly descended, a direct line, usually a mythology from above. We still see this in some states. Still have this mythology surrounding the emperor or the kings and queens. So this was a real revolution in terms of ideas. It didn't last a long time. The republic was overthrown and the monarchy was reinstated. But still this legacy of having, it left a legacy of a rather weak monarch. If we compare the British kings and queens to the Tsars of Russia, for example, they didn't have as much power. The parliamentaire was a more powerful body in the United Kingdom than it was in the rest of Europe, even compared to France and other states in Europe. Austria, Hungary as well. So that was kind of a big moment. This is where this kind of origins of this parliamentary democracy, parliamentary system come from. Another key moment is the rise of British naval power. This really started more towards the 18th century. It replaced the Spanish with their explorations, were of course very powerful. But then there was the rise of British naval power, and this really began an expansion of the beginnings. It gave the means and the transport for the British Empire to begin. We also had our first, in 1721, we had our first Prime Minister. In 1707, Scotland was finally defeated. Scotland joined the Union, and we began to have this really idea of United Kingdom. The Scottish Kingdom, the Welsh Kingdom, and the English Kingdom. This was the beginning of the United Kingdom in 1707, so not that old, around 300 years ago. There were some very famous battles, the Battle of Culloden in Scotland, and even today these battles, and especially the way the British treated, the way the English treated the Scottish Highlanders, very, very cruelly, this left a very painful legacy in Scotland towards Britain. One of the first crises for the British Empire was, of course, in America. There was 13 colonies there, 13 states, and on the American flag, those stripes, the red and white stripes, they represent the 13 colonies. The stars are the states, but the stripes are the 13 colonies, the founding colonies of the United States. These were, there was after some time, there was a rejection of British taxation. Britain wanted to tax the United States, the colonists there, and they refused this taxation. And because of this, they basically fought a war of independence and won. Britain retained its influence in Canada, but they lost the colonial war over almost 8 years, an 8-year battle. And of course, this was of course a big shock because this for Britain, a European, imperial, powerful country, was beaten by a bunch of, at the beginning, not very well equipped colonists. So this was kind of a big moment and a big crisis, I think, for the British ruling class. And this turned their attention more towards other colonial domains, more towards places like India. India became a focus of British colonial rule. And in India, they were able to rule with just a small army and a few civil servants, but the crucial thing, the small army had modern weapons, had cannons, had guns, and they could rule over a huge population in India for almost 2 centuries. Another key moment would be, and this is a key moment we share with Russia as well, was the victory over Napoleon in the 1815. When Napoleon was defeated, of course, France and Britain were great rivals at this time. However, after the Napoleonic Wars, Russia, of course, became a much, much greater power, a much more influential power in Europe. But also, Britain also received a boost, and it really became the global hegemon, we can say, the global leader, for almost a century, until at least the First World War and the end of the First World War. It was a century of kind of British empire. It was at its kind of maximum. It was the world's, it was unchallenged military, unchallenged at sea. The Battle of Trafalgar, of course, with one of our famous admirals, Nelson. The British sea power expanded, the empire expanded into Africa, into Asia, it became a really, truly global empire. Even countries like China and Argentina and Siam, today's Thailand, they were very dependent on British trade and on British rules. So there was a great deal of influence across the world. However, by the end of the 19th century, by the late 1800s, there was an increasing challenge from the United States and an increasing challenge in Europe from Germany. These were really big challenges to the United Kingdom. Interestingly, the challenge of the United States was peaceful. Often, if you study realist politics, realist approaches, rising and falling powers often have conflict. But the United States was a rising power, Britain was a declining power, but there was no conflict there. However, in terms of with Germany, there was a conflict. And there was many opportunities for war with the United States. Not just because we already fought a revolutionary war with them. I don't think this would have stopped the war. There was many disputes over borders in South America. There was the Panama Canal. Who would control and build the Panama Canal? And in the end, building the Panama Canal gave the United States a really truly a global reach. It had a global navy. It could project power to the Pacific and the Atlantic at the same time. The Panama Canal was a big moment. And the British let this happen. They didn't try to control it. They didn't start a war with the United States. However, at this time, in 1860, Britain had 25% of the world's industrial production in its factories. 1/4 of the world's industrial production was in the United Kingdom in 1860. In 1913, just before the Second World War, it was only 10%. And Germany's was 15%. Already, in a few years, the rapid growth of Germany, the rapid industrialization of Germany, it had overtaken the United Kingdom in terms of industrial production. German heavy industry, German military industry, it surpassed Britain. And there became a fear in the United Kingdom, a fear of isolation, a fear of rivalry, a fear of losing the empire. And one of the key conflicts in the beginnings of this conflict was the Boer War. Does anyone know where the Boer War was? This was in South Africa at the end of the 19th century, and it was against farmers, often backed by Germany, against the British, fighting for control of South Africa. And this was the beginning of kind of more industrial war. It was the first time concentration camps were used, actually by the British, to intern civilians. They used civilians, put them in camps to try to separate them and try to defeat the Boers, the farmers there. And this was the beginning of an increasing crisis and tension with Germany, who backed the farmers there. Britain and France, the old enemies, the old Napoleonic rivals, the old imperial rivals, found themselves allied with each other, and then very soon with Russia, against this rising power of Germany. And the inevitable conclusion of this was war. 2 million British people died. At the same time, Ireland was partitioned. At the same time Britain was fighting the First World War, there was a crisis in Northern Ireland. This was the empire. This was all part of the United Kingdom. This was all part of Britain. However, in 1921, they separated this top part. There was a rebellion in Ireland, the Catholic rebellion, the nationalist rebellion against Ireland, and the southern part of Ireland was separated from, the northern part kept within the United Kingdom. This was separated. It was called partition, and home rule for the Catholics here. After fighting, almost a civil war, many people, there was a great deal of conflict about this. And the reason it was separated is because here the majority were what we would call unionists. They wanted to retain part of the union. They were mainly Protestants. The majority was around 90% Protestants, and they drew the boundary according to religion, about how many, the percentages of the Protestants living here. However, there were still many Catholics within these boundaries, so it separated families, it separated people on religious ground. But this was a crisis that happened during and in the closing days and immediately after the First World War. However, in 1922, despite this weakness, despite this domestic weakness, Britain was one of the victors of the First World War. And with the League of Nations, which was set up after the First World War, with the League of Nations, and taking over some of Germany's colonial possessions, in 1922, Britain reached its peak. In 1922, this is, as our John mentioned, this is not so long ago, it's only 90 years ago. But 90 years ago, the British Empire, it had control over 1/4 of the globe, 1/4 of the territory of the world, and it ruled 1/4 of the world's people. And now, as I said, we've gone back. Now today we look at a very small island, a very less influential island. But at that time, only 90 years ago, it was at this extent. And of course, I think this is it has some effect on politics today, on identity today, on the way people think. It's kind of, I think all empires, I think France and I think Russia as well, there's a post-imperial kind of coming to terms with this great shift, a very quick shift for loss of empire towards nation state. And just before we talk just a little more about the history, the next key moment was, of course, the Second World War, which, of course, was a defining moment for Russia as well. And it was a defining moment in British identity as well. Nobody wanted this war. They tried to appease Hitler in 1938 in Munich. The British Prime Minister Chamberlain, he tried to appease, tried to persuade Hitler not to continue his aggression, giving them a little part of the Czech Republic, Czechoslovakia. They would have some German lands there, and for this Hitler would stop his aggression. Of course, this didn't stop Hitler, it just encouraged him. And in 1939, war was declared by France and Britain. In September 1939, war was declared with Germany. And what resulted was there was a lot of rapid defeats. In 1940, the French were basically defeated. The British evacuated. They lost a lot of equipment. They ran away. Basically, they were defeated in the face of the German infantry and the German tanks. They were far superior, and Britain was left alone at this moment in the world. The United States wasn't part of the war at this time. Russia was not part of the war. Britain was alone, standing alone against Hitler. The whole of Europe had gone. And this is, of course, a key kind of part of a national myth, a national identity myth. These key words that all British people know about Dunkirk, which was the town in France where they left. And at this moment, Britain was isolated and alone. The next moment was the Battle of Britain. The Battle of Britain was fought between the German Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, and the RAF, the Royal Air Force. And at this time, Hitler was trying to defeat, bombing the cities, London, Birmingham, Liverpool. All these cities were devastated by bombings. Particularly one myth, and very much it is a myth, is the city of Coventry, which is next to Birmingham, which was an industrial city. Coventry was heavily bombed, and many people even say that Churchill allowed this to happen. Churchill allowed this bombing to happen. He didn't let London. They tried to defend London and Oxford and Bath. But for Coventry, an industrial city, many people, there's kind of some myths that Churchill let it happen. And it became a symbol. It became a symbol of the aggression. It became a symbol, hundreds of people died in this bombing. But it became a symbol to kind of, almost propaganda, to motivate the British people. But Coventry is a key moment. And the Battle of Britain is a key moment. And this comes from a very famous quote from Churchill. One of the famous military quotes is that after the Battle of Britain, Churchill said, "In the field of human conflict, never have so many owed so much to so few." And that was that the very few pilots, the very few defenders, they saved Britain they saved the whole country from an invasion. Hitler had plans to invade the United Kingdom, called Operation Sea Lion. He had plans to invade, but first of all he wanted to defeat the Air Force. But he didn't achieve this. And then, of course, I think we all know the history of the Second World War after that, from 1941, Russia's vital participation. Russia won the war, absolutely on the Eastern Front. Germany was defeated, basically by the Soviet Union. From then on, these were of course, really founding moments for both of our countries. After the Second World War, Britain was a much reduced power. Britain was not, although it was a winner, Britain suffered a great deal. Britain had to rely on the Marshall Plan, which was an American aid, American financial and industrial aid. And I think the Marshall Plan was very successful. It bonded. The United Kingdom became reliant on the United States, as many other European countries did. The United States gained a great popularity. But even at this time, we had rationing. My grandparents and other people's parents, you couldn't get butter and bread. You had to have only so much per week. Even for a few years after the Second World War, it was a real time of not a time of prosperity. In 1947, India and Pakistan, the British India, ceased to exist. They became separate countries. This had disastrous consequences for India and Pakistan. The British who'd drawn these borders, they were drawn by a map maker in London, And this had absolutely disastrous consequences for the different populations, the Hindus, the Muslims, the Sikhs. It was not, the boundaries of British India were not drawn for them. They were drawn for the British colonial administrators. And thanks to these British administrators, these had disastrous and quite shameful consequences for Britain in India. And this was really the beginning of decolonization, the end of empire. With India gone, every country followed. Mostly it was peaceful, although, however, in places like Kenya, there was kind of wars going on. It took a long time in countries like Zimbabwe until the 1980s, I think. In Zimbabwe, the white leaders, former British colonials, they wanted to hold on to power. But eventually, nearly all these territories were coming back. And a key moment is 1997. And what happened in 1997 in terms of British and Chinese relations? Hong Kong. Hong Kong ceased to be part of Britain. And this really was almost the end of empire. There was no significant territories left. Of course, there are one or two small territories left in the world. But Hong Kong was really a significant territory. It was a big manufacturing center. It was a very important strategic center. And with giving this back, it really was the kind of the symbolic moment when I think Prince Charles, he took the British flag down, and that was it. It was kind of the end of, almost the end, a real kind of moment in the end of empire. So 1997 was really the end of any significant overseas territories as part of Britain. After the war, Britain also, it changed. Britain became a country of immigration. We had a great deal of immigrants from the Caribbean. There was a labor shortage after the Second World War. There wasn't enough workers. A lot of Jamaicans, Barbados, they came to live and work in the United Kingdom. A lot of Indians came from India and Pakistan. A lot of Indians came from Uganda, fleeing Idi Amin, the dictator there. He was persecuting the Indians living in, there was a great Indian population in Uganda. A lot of them moved to the United Kingdom. Cities were transformed. Birmingham has a huge Bangladeshi population, a huge Indian population. Glasgow has a big Chinese population. You can hear many different accents. Immigration from India, from China, from Barbados, and all of them have picked up a local accent. You can hear in Leeds a Sikh with a Yorkshire accent. And today England is around 85% kind of, we would say, white British, but 15% is a cosmopolitan, diverse society. And I think if any of you visit London or visited London, you will see London is really a global city. It's a real cosmopolitan city. You will hear every language. Interestingly, what do you think is the second most spoken language today in the United Kingdom? Arabic. Arabic, no? Of course, English is first. What is second?
French.
No, not French. It's not Welsh. It's not Scottish.
Arabian.
No, not Arabian. It's not Russian. But actually, Russia is the closest. It's Polish. Polish today is the second language of the United Kingdom. Because in 2004, around the time, the European Union expanded. The European Union expanded to include Czechoslovakia, Poland, and there was a huge immigration of Poles to the United Kingdom. The borders, they didn't need visas anymore, they didn't need work permits. The European Union, its founding values, freedom of trade, freedom of rights, freedom of movement. So I have the right to live and work anywhere in the European Union. If I want to live in Stockholm, I have a right to do this. No one can, I don't need a work permit, I don't need a visa. Just as if someone from Stockholm wants to work in London, it's also okay. And there was a huge immigration from Poland over the last 10 years. Many of the bus drivers in Birmingham are Polish. When I was studying there, many Polish bus drivers. There's many Polish shops, restaurants in London today. It became a real magnet. A lot of our builders, this is kind of, a lot of the builders, construction workers are Polish in the UK today. And many of them stay. Many of them bring their families, educate their children, and the Polish community with each year becomes a more British community. But of course, with this immigration, from Asia, from Africa, from the Arab world, from Eastern Europe, also it kind of brings some insecurities. You can see the same almost anywhere in the world. You can see it in the United States, a country of immigration. Many people, not all, but some people in the United States worry about Mexican immigration and the influence of Spanish culture. In Russia, there's Central Asian influences, and certain people in society worry about this. The same in the United Kingdom. Rapid changes, rapid immigration can sometimes cause conflict. It's very difficult to manage, and you have to manage these issues very carefully. But I think, on the whole, Britain has been quite successful in managing these issues. There are some problems, occasionally problems. There's been some conflicts in some cities, but in general, most of these conflicts have been managed quite well. What time do we have? Okay. So this is the changing Britain. I'll just one more. We talked about the end of empire. I just wanted to mention one more key event for the end of empire, the beginning of decolonization, was the loss of the Suez Canal in Egypt. The canal between Egypt and the Egyptian canal was controlled basically by French and British. But Nasser, the president of Egypt, wanted to nationalize the canal. In Suez, the British and French, they backed an invasion by Israel, and then they said they would come in to support Israel and take over the Suez Canal. However, the United States rejected this. The United States said no. The United States was against, was for decolonization, was against empire, and eventually Britain and France backed down. And Britain and France lost a great deal of influence in Egypt. They lost a great deal of influence in the Arab world. And they really became, the United States became the world's policeman in a way. This was almost a handover, a key moment. Britain and France were actually powerless to do anything in this moment. Suez was a real, the beginning, I think the beginning had already happened, but it really was the end of legitimacy. It was also a very cynical part of empire. It was not for the interests of the local people or for any kind of democratic wishes of the Egyptian people. It was a very cynical geopolitical maneuver, and the United States exposed this as it was. And this for France and the United Kingdom was a kind of a disaster. So Britain had to find a different way. The empire is over. The empire is over, let's say in kind of 1956, after Suez, 1960s, decolonization, especially in Africa and Asia. Where does Britain go? What is Britain's role in the world? And for quite a few years, from I think the 1960s, Britain wanted to join the European Union. It was not a founding member of the European Union. The founding members of the European Union were six. It was Germany, West Germany, France, Italy, Belgium, Holland, and Luxembourg. Six states joined the European Union. Britain was not one of them. But Britain was looking for a new place, a new role. Its economy was not doing very well. In the 1970s, there was a British car manufacturer called Rover. In the 1970s, it was the third biggest in the world. Now it doesn't exist anymore. British industry was in decline. Shipbuilding is almost gone. We almost don't build any ships in the United Kingdom anymore. After the loss of empire, after the closed markets of empire, the industry was no longer competitive. It could not compete with other industries, with American industry, and later with Japanese industry, with other industries. British manufacturing, British industrial power declined hugely. I don't know what percent it is today, but it's a very small percent of the world, from 25% earlier. So Britain needed to find new markets and a new politics. And it tried to join the European Union many times. It was called the, I'm not sure what it was called at the time, maybe just the European Economic Community. Its first name was the European Coal and Steel Community. But it then became the European Community, and it was rejected. It was rejected by the French, by Charles de Gaulle. He said if Britain comes into the European Union, it will just cause a mess. It doesn't believe in this project of unification. It doesn't believe in this European project. It's a different kind of power. And it was rejected at least 2 or 3 times by Charles de Gaulle. And only in 1973 did Britain join the European Union, and much later than other countries. But this was a kind of a big moment. This imperial power had to give up its kind of sovereignty. When you join the European Union, you give up sovereignty. You give up some control over borders, over trade policy. And increasingly, as the European Union developed, more and more sovereignty is given up. You give up legal rights. There's a European Court of Justice. There's a European Parliament. You have to give up sovereignty. And this was kind of a very controversial decision in the United Kingdom at the time. And still is today. We'll talk a little bit right at the end about the future and what this might mean. In the 1960s, Northern Ireland became a big issue again. Northern Ireland became a very serious issue again. The British Army was sent there. There was protests. Basically, the nationalists wanted to unify Ireland. They wanted to have a unified Ireland. They wanted these territories that they felt they lost. They wanted them finally to be returned. However, the Unionists here, the Protestants, of course, wanted to keep their connection and their identity, their religious connection as well. You know, two Protestant, a greater Protestant community here, a Catholic community here. And initially, the British Army came to protect the Catholics living in Belfast and here. They came to protect them because they were being attacked by Protestants, by Unionists, who were the majority. The British Army came to protect them. But over time, the anger grew at the British Army being there, and the Irish Republican Army, the IRA, came back and began a campaign, a military campaign, against Britain. Many bombings, many shootings, many killings at this time. This was a defining moment, and certainly of my childhood. You know, remembering on TV, you would often see both sides. I mean, both sides were really, it was a spiral. One side would attack the other, and it was just a spiral out of control. Margaret Thatcher was almost killed by the IRA. There was a bombing in Brighton, on the south coast here, at a conference. Some of her ministers, her cabinet ministers, politicians were killed by the IRA. Lord Mountbatten, the last governor of India, and Prince Charles's uncle, he was killed by the IRA. So it was a really, you know, this was a really traumatic time for the United Kingdom. And it was really only in 1998 that there was some progress on this issue with what's called the Good Friday Agreement, when they agreed to some devolution. There would be a power-sharing body here. Politicians from the south, nationalist politicians, and politicians, Protestant politicians, unions, they would work together. And power was devolved to Northern Ireland. It became a little more independent. Of course, not full independence, but it had a local parliament, heavily subsidised by by London, but a local parliament, and this has been relatively successful. These problems have not gone away, but they're at least working together. The Sinn Féin, the Irish Republicans, the Unionist parties, they work together in Northern Ireland today, much better than they did. But things are not perfect. But there's also been a rise of nationalist parties, a rise of nationalism for a Welsh state, a Welsh nation, and a Scottish nation. There has been a pro-devolution, we call it, giving powers to these states. And in Edinburgh, there is now a Scottish Parliament. There's different rules. There's different rules for education. Universities are free in Scotland. If you are Scottish, it is free to go to Edinburgh University or Glasgow University. If you are English and you want to go to London University, Birmingham University, it costs today £10,000 to go to university. You get it as a loan. You have to pay this loan back later as a tax. It's kind of free when you go, but you must pay back later. And a big change. In 10 years, when I went to university, it was free. When I went to university in London, it didn't cost anything. In fact, the government gave you a small stipend for everyone, basically. Now, every year it got more expensive. And today it's 10,000. It's very controversial. However, in Scotland, if you are Scottish, it's free to go to the universities in Edinburgh or Glasgow. But if I want to go to Edinburgh University, again, it will cost £10,000. So these have real power. They also have power in terms of the health service. For example, it's free to get medicine. You can get medicine for free in Scotland, but you can't get it in England. So devolution does change things. It changes society. And today, the Scottish Nationalist Party, it runs Scotland. It's in charge of Scotland. And next year, there will be a referendum. The Scottish people will vote whether they want to stay part of the United Kingdom or whether they want to leave the United Kingdom. And nobody knows. Probably they will reject it, but who knows? They may accept it. There's, of course, a lot of myths of national identity. Everybody is watching Braveheart and Mel Gibson. Sean Connery, James Bond, he's Scottish. Sean Connery currently lives in Spain, but he's a very proud Scottish nationalist. And from his base in Spain, he kind of is campaigning for Scottish nationalism, Scottish freedom. So we will see, but maybe this will be a huge change for the United Kingdom, because England itself is a very, very small country, and it'll be interesting what will happen. What will happen to Scotland? Can Scotland survive on its own? Will Scotland be allowed to join the European Union? Will they have to reapply to the European Union? Will they have to rejoin? Can it automatically join? What will happen? Can it survive on its own? And also in Wales, there's also kind of a Wales Nationalist Party. Not as strong, and I think this is partly from history, as we discussed at the beginning. Wales for a long time has been part of the United Kingdom. It was hundreds of years before. There was, of course, a long history, but the history of tensions between Scotland and England are more recent tensions between there. Of course, we will see. We will see what happens there. But that's a real feature of British politics in the next year. There's maybe just one thing about British politics. There's three main parties in Britain as a whole, in the United Kingdom. There's three main parties. There's the Labour Party, which arose in the 1900s. It was, a socialist party, a working class party, a quite new party. It arose in the 1900s. It was for, for social affairs. It had connections, of course, at times with Soviet Union even. It was a much more left-wing party. There should be a free education, a social network, a big government to support people. At the other side is the Conservatives. The Conservatives, the Tory parties, are kind of a more traditional party towards low taxation, a small state. And they have long historical roots, right back deep into history, the aristocratic classes. David Cameron is a kind of a good representative of the kind of ideal type of the Conservatives. A kind of aristocrat, quite privileged. And this is a problem for him, actually, because he reminds people too much of the kind of the old Conservatives, the old ruling classes. And there's a third party called the Liberal Democrats. They are somewhere in between these two parties. And currently, for the first time since I was born, there is a power sharing between the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives. And I don't know how well this is working. I think the next election the Labour Party will come back, I think. This power sharing is a lot of problems getting things done these days. So, I think almost time to I'll just make some conclusions, and then I hope you'll have some questions about what we've talked about. So I think today I tried to give a very quick overview, a snapshot of some key moments in the British history and imperial history. And we can all agree that Britain is not the power it was. It's not the military power, it was number one. It was not the economic power, it was number one. Now it's not. And increasingly it will be less so. There's very little British manufacturing. Britain's dominated today by financial services. So the credit crisis from 2008 has been very severe for London. Industry's declined. However, we've also seen, at the same time, some kind of a rise of soft power in a way. As we just talked at the beginning of the class, cultural exports like football, tourism, music, films, they've also had a quite powerful influence on the world. And I think given Britain quite a positive image in the world. Education as well. Many people want to send their students, their children, to Oxford and Cambridge, to London, to Edinburgh. And British education is still one of the great established educations. Sports in terms of not just football, but also tennis, in other countries rugby and cricket are still very important. The music we already talked about, Pink Floyd, the Queen, the list is very long. So there's kind of, at the same time as this decline in hard power, maybe there's some increase in soft power, which kind of keeps Britain having a profile in the world today. On UK-Russia relations, I think, historically, I can't say that we have the best relations at the moment, unfortunately. I think there's actually many similarities between Britain and Russia. I think in terms of humour and culture, imperial past, history, we have many shared characteristics. But I think that the Cold War, certainly for our older generations, for parents and grandparents' generation, the Cold War, propaganda on both sides has made it difficult. Today, policies like visas make it very difficult. It's very difficult for Russians to visit the United Kingdom, which is a great shame. I hope they will change this rule. And also, it's quite difficult for us to get visas to come to Russia. I think it's a shame. I think sometimes the role of the media in the United Kingdom is very fair to Russia. It's often a very negative portrayal of Russia, unfortunately. The role of the media. I think there's little knowledge of Russia. Not many people travel here. Of course, you need visas. It's far, language barrier. And I think most of our images of Russia today are actually through Chelsea Football Club and Abramovich. That's kind of the key. Maybe the most famous Russian today in England. I'm almost sure. So I think there's potential there, and I hope in the future, I really hope that the relations improve. I think there's great potential there, and on many issues, I think there's not that much between our positions. And I think that Britain certainly, I think there's also Britain needs to find in some ways new directions. There's a very difficult relationship with Europe. Britain, the Conservative government, David Cameron, has promised that in, I think, if he's elected, there will be a referendum on Britain's membership of the European Union. And it's very unpopular at the moment. There's a kind of a wave, there's a new political party called the UK Independence Party. They want to leave the European Union, they're campaigning to leave it, they've become a powerful force. So there is a chance that Britain might leave the European Union, which would be, I think, disastrous for Britain, because no one would want to invest there, you would have to change all the laws. I think Britain's gained a great deal from European Union membership. I think there's been no wars in the European Union. It's been a very successful security group. It's been a very successful economic union. So, but that is an alternative. It's a possibility that Britain may distance itself from Europe. I think that would make it a weaker power. I think Britain is stronger in Europe and influencing Europe than it is outside. And also, Britain talks about a special relationship with the United States. It's a big part of elite politics. But if you ask people in the United States, of course there is an alliance there, but the United States has many special relations. It has special relations with Japan, with Korea, with Germany, with Mexico, with Canada. Britain is one relationship with the United States. But in Britain we still have this idea of a special relationship. It's really a myth, it's a fiction. And even Barack Obama, he said Britain should not leave. He said, don't leave. Or his diplomat said, Britain should not leave the European Union. Certainly Barack Obama is not interested in a deeper integration with Britain. Barack Obama is a Pacific president. I mean, I think we can all see this with his policies. Even symbolically, he removed a statue of Churchill from his office. He took it out, said we don't need this anymore. And he's become a much more Pacific president. I'm not against this policy. I think the Pacific is really the economic and dynamic force. I think there's potential for challenges and conflict in the Asia-Pacific, but I think it is certainly the economic future. And I think that Obama's recognized. But Britain's a long way from Asia. Britain's a long way, geographically a long way away from Asia. It's more difficult for it to be connected to these processes. So where does it go? I mean, this is a big question. Its military will certainly decline over the next few years. The British military, I think, will be a weaker force. It's fourth now, but I think not for much longer. Many Britons choose to live abroad. Many Britons choose to emigrate to the United States, to Australia, to Canada, even to Spain and France, and even to Dubai these days. In Dubai, you pay zero tax. So Europeans are going to Dubai. Dubai has become a centre. You'll find a lot of British in Dubai. So, there's big kind of challenges and changes, and what does this mean? One of the interesting things that Britain and some in Britain, this UK Independence Party, and Russia share, is that they share the idea of an economic union. Many people in Britain are reluctant for a political union of politics and giving up sovereignty. They want the economic union. They want to have the big markets, the free trade, but they don't want the political union. They don't want European laws, they don't want European labour laws. So many people are looking for an economic union. And in some ways, Russia today is promoting this with its Eurasian Union. This is very much an economic union currently between Kazakhstan and Belarus, but could expand. And Russia is really promoting this Eurasian Union as an economic union. And for maybe some in the United Kingdom, this could be very attractive. So maybe one day you might see Britain joining Eurasian Union. That's kind of a joke. Anyway, thank you for listening, and I would really be happy to take some questions from you. Yes.
I have a question about Irish Public Army.
Yes.
As I know, they announced that their terroristic activities was over. I guess the last time was in 2007 or something like that. And my question is there any opportunities of their returning to the struggle, or we can say about end of their terroristic acts?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and I think they still have some weapons. I think there was a decommissioning process where they tried to take their weapons, to take their some rocket launchers, some explosives, some guns. There was an international decommissioning of these weapons, but I'm sure there still some exist in different places. And the Irish Republican movement and army is split today. It's split. There's some people who would say the war is absolutely over, that there's no chance, no return to violence. But there's still some active people who say no. We still have this line. We still have a line between the United Kingdom and between Ireland. And until this line is gone, they will continue this struggle. I think the vast majority, know that this is not the way to go. That this is a mistake, and from within the community, within the Irish Republican community, they don't want to return to violence. Return to violence, it won't be good for the economy, it won't be good for people's lives, it won't be good for anything. They don't see any value in this. However, who knows? If the process somehow gets stuck, if for some reason, it's a possibility. I don't think it's a likely possibility. I think London doesn't want to, there's less, they want to manage, they're not trying to hang on to it. London is not trying to hang on to this. If eventually, it's about 60% today. It's about 60% Protestant Unionist, around 40% Catholic. So if you have an election in this territory today, if you have an election, then they would choose to remain. And it used to be that the Catholic population is slowly increasing. So maybe one day there will be an election, and the nationalist Catholic population will vote, and they will agree. There will be a democratic referendum, and it will become a united Ireland. That's still a long way away, and of course would be resisted by the Unionists there, the Protestant community. But even today, there's big, even small things, even flying the flags. Which flag do you fly from the Belfast administration office, Belfast City Hall? If you put the Union flag there, there's protest. If you take it down, there's protest. So it's kind of very, very difficult. And people march there. There's no difference. If you walk down the street, you cannot tell an Irish Catholic from a British Protestant. There's no difference. Ethnically, there's absolutely no difference. We almost watch the same TV shows and everything else. And one of my very good friends is Irish. And basically we are the same people, so we're really not that different. But they make differences. So there's parades. People have parades. People have these murals on the buildings. Half the building is painted in the flags. Even the side of the street is painted in the different colours of the different communities. So they try to make a difference. And one of the big differences is, one way you can tell is by the football shirt they are wearing. If they are wearing Glasgow Rangers, which is of course not even in Ireland, but Glasgow also has kind of Protestant and Catholic community. If they are Glasgow Rangers, wearing a Glasgow Rangers t-shirt, they're certainly unionists, certainly for the union with the United Kingdom. If they're wearing Glasgow Celtic, they are certainly Irish Catholics, Irish nationalists. But I think it's very unlikely to a long answer. But I think it's very unlikely because I think there's enough people within the movement who would prevent it. But you can never say never with these things. You never know when terrorism could become a problem again. It's very dangerous to say never. But I think it's unlikely. Yes.
Could you tell more about Russian and British relations? Who we are today? Allies, partners, or enemies? And what do you think about the future of our relations?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and I thought about this question before giving the presentation. And it actually, I'll be honest, it's very difficult to answer. It's very difficult to answer this question because I think we can the politics. I think there's at the political level. I think there's a lack of understanding. As I said, I don't think many. I'll be very surprised how many. I bet almost no British politicians have actually been to Russia and have strong connections here. I don't think that's where. I think there's a real gap in understanding and a real. A kind of a lack of understanding of the changes in Russia since the end of the Soviet Union and what this means for Russia, and understanding the political system here. And I think this lack of understanding, it reflects in our relations. I can't say, well, we're certainly not enemies, absolutely not, but we're certainly not allies. We're kind of in some kind of, yeah, partners is a good way of saying it, I think. Partners in some areas, and in other areas not. You know, and I think, so on this one, yeah, I think, it depends. I mean, it always depends on political leadership. And I think on who is in charge and who. I certainly think during the Medvedev time there was a warmer moment towards the West in general. I think that's undisputable. With the return of Putin, that's, you know, he's maybe not as warm as it was. But everything can change. And I do think, you know, I said before, I think Russia. I think it has a very important role to play in Asia Pacific, but also in Europe. And I think people will eventually realize this. But at the moment, there's a gap in understanding. And I hope, in time, you know, with more Russians, you know, living and working in the UK today, this gap in understanding will increase. This gap in understanding will decrease. I hope. What do you think? What do you think of our future relations? Do you think there's optimism?
I agree with you because it depends on our politics. Depends on Putin, maybe our next Prime Minister of Great Britain.
Absolutely, absolutely. It really does depend. The problem is in the UK today, there's not much difference between our politicians. They all seem to be almost the same. Their policies are very similar. They really seem to be kind of from the same mold. So I don't know whether there will be a big change. We will see. Any other questions? Yeah.
What is the politics of Britain in Arctic? So is it its own politics or in accordance with the European Union politics?
I don't. I mean, the Arctic is not really a big thing. I don't think we have any claims on the Arctic. On the Antarctic, we do. Surprisingly, you know, we are a long way from the Antarctic. But on there, we have our claims on the Antarctic, and they are disputed by Argentina in the Antarctic. In the Arctic, I don't think we have any kind of claims there. I'm not an expert on either of these. But I'm pretty sure no claims. I mean, we had some claims, you know, on sea resources with Iceland. We once fought kind of not a war, but it was called the Cod War. Cod is a fish, and these kind of fishermen were kind of fighting over the fish resources in the sea. That was in the 1970s. But in the Arctic, I don't think we have a kind of I don't think there's any particular policy on this. I think we leave this to Canada, United States, Russia, and Norway. I don't know of any particular. I'm not an expert on the UK and the Arctic. Yes.
Why the first English international relations education department was named honor of Woodrow Wilson? I suppose that maybe it because of 14 pounds. But I have to think about it. What do you know about Medvedev?
Yeah, I don't know. You were talking about the first chair of international relations, the first international politics department in the United Kingdom. It wasn't in London or any of these cities. It was here, in a place I don't even know how to spell this. Called I think I won't spell it because I don't know. It's called Aberystwyth. Aberystwyth is a very long name. It's a Welsh name. And the first chair was established here, and it was right after the Second World War, I think. And it was called the Woodrow Wilson Chair, the Woodrow Wilson position, named after, of course, Woodrow Wilson. And I think it was donated by a businessman, I think, at the time, working for peace. Someone like Carnegie, I don't think it was him, but someone else. It was donated. It was kind of, some money was given to this by a businessman to make a chair for kind of world peace. And at the time, I think it was 1919, after the Second World War, after the First World War, and they set up this chair at the same time as the League of Nations. The League of Nations in 1919 was the future of world peace. The League of Nations, everyone was hoping that this was the new system, kind of some formative international government. Everything would be negotiated and debated. There would be no more wars. Of course, the League of Nations didn't work. America didn't join. American Congress didn't join. Woodrow Wilson, the American president, tried to make it work, but then his Congress wouldn't let even the United States join. It didn't work. Well, of course, we had the Second World War. But there was a moment after the First World War to try to develop peace studies and international relations, a kind of science. If we can understand international relations, then we can, there'll be no more wars. And this was set up in this context, and therefore named after Woodrow Wilson, who was viewed as a kind of a figure of peace and a statesman at the time. a good question. Yes?
What do you think about the United Kingdom overseas territories like Falkland Islands and another islands in the Caribbean Sea and another oceans? Maybe it's time to leave it? What do you think?
That's a very interesting question, and if you know, certainly in the late 1970s, the United Kingdom would probably have left the Falkland Islands. There was kind of negotiations with Argentina, exactly as you say. Many, you know, you're not alone. Many people say it's time to leave, also within the United Kingdom, but also in other states as well. And there was a moment, but unfortunately, the end result in 1982 was a war over this. And around 300 British died, and around 700 Argentinians died in this war. And you know, it was very painful for both countries. Very painful moments. And since then, relations have not really recovered, and negotiations haven't really developed since that moment. And right now, relations are also a bit of a low. The Argentinian government is making very strong claims, and the British government is making counterclaims on these islands. And that's the situation, unfortunately. I hope that one day the relations with Britain and the United Kingdom can be resolved to both their satisfaction. But at the moment, it seems a little stuck. I think it takes time. I think it takes a change of government from both sides, a change of political leadership and negotiations.
I would like to add something about the local population. You know, according to the last referendum, you know, it's about 90% they are Scottish and maybe Englishmen. You know, and it's impossible. You know, it's just to solve such kind of problem because of referendum. It depends on the local population. I think it's very important. You know, it's for UK just to say this as a symbol.
It's a symbol.
Yeah,
in some ways, it's a symbol of things. And Tamara, as she noted, there was a referendum this week.
Yeah.
Actually, there was a referendum this week. You can follow it on the news.
It's 90%. We are
More, yeah. The local referendum.
Yeah, it's a participation about 90%.
Mm-hmm.
90 plus something.
Mm-hmm.
We are British.
Mm-hmm.
No doubt. It's something about people policy.
Yeah, I mean, it's of course, you know, there's no doubt that this it's a shame in some ways. I hope in future there'll be some working agreement because, you know, I mean, they're right next to Argentina. It's right next door, and I think there'd be great opportunities for the islanders themselves to have better relations, and for Argentina to have better relations. But it's a very controversial subject. Many different issues are involved, historical issues, local populations issues, many history of war. It's a very complicated issue, and a very difficult one to resolve either way. It's certainly a problem, and I don't see it being resolved very soon.
What do you think about the new idea of Barack Obama to create a free trade area between the United States and European Union? Because in this sense, the United Kingdom is not interested in separating the European Union.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, let's see what happens with that. It's very difficult to negotiate these free trade agreements. There's a real movement for free trade agreements in the world at the moment. There's this Trans-Pacific Partnership that Obama's pushing in the Pacific as well. There's a real kind of push towards this at the moment. And I think, yes, if it happens, I think it would be another reason for Britain not to leave the European Union. Put some pressure, actually, on Britain to stay. So let's see what happens. It's very difficult to know how these negotiations will progress. I'm not sure. Any more? I think time for lunch?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, thank you for listening, and thank you for coming.